Okay, so welcome to the show. I'm really excited to have you all on. Let's see, starting with Jonathan. Jonathan is a producer and reporter at the Young Turks, and he's been covering Mayor Pete for a while. Making his debut, his Katie Halper show debut. So things are really historic moment, guys. Things are really going to start moving and shaking for you professionally. Then we have Emmanuel Kennedy, who is a South Bend Black Lives Matter co-founder, also an academic sociologist. And then we have Erical, who is a local homeless advocate, and Anthony Clark, who's someone I've known for a while, relatively speaking a while. We met a couple years ago at the People's Summit. So excited to hear from you. Thank you so much for coming on. And I guess wanted to start with, I had said to you guys before that I'd wanted to do something about Mayor Pete, because I just think he's kind of someone who's his problematic nature, I would say, is not on a lot of people's radar. I also thought it'd be a really good opportunity, especially for Erical and Emmanuel and Anthony, to talk about the activism that's happening and the organizing that's happening in the streets, because, we may not be able to do stuff about Biden's picks, which is very depressing. But hopefully we can actually do stuff about the the problems that Biden and Mayor Pete have contributed to and continue to contribute to. So tell us, Emmanuel, will you tell us what your experience of what it's like to be in South Bend with Mayor Pete in the House?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people generally we're pretty excited about Mayor Pete and generally excited about his run. I know when he first started running, I was excited. I was like, here's our mayor. He's going to put our town on the map. And he's really projecting this image that South Bend is this city that is coming back. But I think if you look into what we did and what I eventually did was looking into what was going on in South Bend, you realize that it's a tale of two South Bends. There's a South Bend that is succeeding for a lot of people, mainly white folks that are in his circle. And then if you look at the broader Black population in South Bend, you notice that there is catastrophic failure on multiple fronts that's happening to Black folks, from health injustices to environmental injustices. And that culminated in the shooting of an unarmed Black man, Eric Logan, this summer as he was running. And that really erupted into a frenzy of these are issues that have been happening for such a long time, and we will no longer stand for it.
And how was he responsive?
Well, it depends on how you want to define responsive. So one thing I think you will kind of know about Mayor Pete is that he tends to hide behind bureaucratic structures. And so rather than coming out and saying that this is wrong and I'm going to fire the police chief and fire the officers outright, or get the police chief to fire them, or reform the Board of Public Safety, he decided to punt it off like he usually does in a lot of. So it was very much par for the course for what Mayor Pete tends to do when responding to any sort of crisis. And one thing that I noticed in one of the initial protests at the police station, he was asked by protesters to say Black Lives Matter, Mayor Pete. And he said, and I don't think anybody caught it though, but he said, of course, Black Lives Matter. So it was a certain amount of reluctance that came to actually saying Black Lives Matter. Right. I mean, I'm sure now he can say it now that it's popular, but that sort of reluctance stuck with me, and I know it stuck with a lot of the Black community.
And Jonathan, what about you? How did you get interested in Mayor Pete?
So my interest was fairly pedestrian to start off with.
No pun intended. Transportation guy?
My apologies. Sorry. But basically, once the presidential campaign kicked off, as a journalist, I was just looking at which of these candidates is both viable, but probably hasn't been vetted a lot. And I actually started off in local journalism. And so I kind of thought, I'll bet there's stories there that the local media have not uncovered yet. So let's see what I can find out.
And what did you find out?
How much time do we have? Well, look, I mean, the big scandal around his mayoralty was the secret police tapes. Emmanuel, please correct me at any point if you think I'm going astray here. characterizing South Bend stuff. But that was, as far as I could tell, the big lingering scandal / mystery. And the police employee who was eventually fired, who had heard these tapes or said she had heard these tapes, said publicly that there was discussion of a plan to oust Chief Darrell Boykins, who was the police chief at the time that Buttigieg became mayor and was, in fact, the city's first Black police chief. And but other than that, there was not known much about what was on these tapes. She did allude to the use of racist rhetoric, but various legal fights arose, and so she shut up, and I believe has not spoken since, although she spoke to the Associated Press a little bit after I found out what was on the tapes, because it turned out that the city has for years had legal documents detailing what was on the tapes, and that included this former employee, describing police discussions where they talked about discussions with Buttigieg's donors before he won the mayoralty, talking with those donors about their distaste for Darrell Boykins, the chief. And of course, once the tapes came out, and Buttigieg controlled, at the time, this I guess was back in early 2012, I think, when he first became mayor, he controlled the narrative about what was going on. And the first thing that people knew about it was that he said publicly, I have to fire the chief because or else the feds are going to throw him in jail for wiretapping these cops. And I warned you I could go on all night about this stuff, but a lot of separate pieces of the narrative just did not hold up. And I can go into as much detail as you or anyone else wants, I think. But that's the basic gist of it. But there were also other scandals as well. I reported with Mike Harriet over at The Root, where we obtained documents showing that 10 Black police officers, this is a city of about 100,000 people, so that's a not insignificant portion of the Black constituency of the officers on the police force. 10 of them had written to city officials, including specifically Buttigieg, saying there's systemic racist issues within the force. Please help us. And he never responded to them. There was a suicide that was declared, there was a hanging death of a 16-year-old Black boy that was declared a suicide. This is prior to Buttigieg becoming mayor. The mother asked Buttigieg for help opening the investigation, by which I mean having one in the first place, because there had been no investigation. He said, call my office. She did. He never responded. There was another one where the police chief who Buttigieg replaced Boykins with was accused of failing to back up a Black lieutenant. And the Indiana State Police did a secret report on what exactly happened, which they then gave to Buttigieg. And Buttigieg characterized the findings of that report publicly, but no one knew the truth. The head of the public safety board, a white cop, a former cop, resigned because he had been allowed to see that secret report, but hadn't been allowed to talk about it. Only Buttigieg was allowed to talk about it. And I got an excerpt from that report that flatly contradicts various statements that Buttigieg made about what the report itself said. So there were more than one incident here, with a recurring pattern of people not being heard, people not being helped who were seeking help, and it happened often enough that people I spoke to said, yeah, it was a blind spot for him.
To be charitable, maybe.
I'm talking about the people I spoke to who were in a position to have access to, the inner circle there.
Right. Well, I want to, it would be really unfair if we just focused on how terrible Mayo Pete was in terms of, racism and Black Lives Matter. It's so unfair for me to do that without also having people learn about how terrible he is about the interrelated issue of homelessness. And so to do that, Aracal Bloss, you want to share where you are?
Yes. Thankfully, we have started a program at a motel, several motels in South Bend for the homeless. So I may have a spotty connection.
How has Mayor Pete interacted with the city around issues of homelessness?
Well, I think it very much connects to what Emmanuel's saying about Black Lives Matter and John. We have a large minority community, and during his time, we had 40% poverty rate of our Black South Bend residents and an 11% unemployment rate. And he also had no Black males in his administration. And shortly after he became mayor, the investment in minority and women-owned businesses went to zero. So we have a budget of over $360 million a year, and zero of that was going to Black businesses in our impoverished communities. So he did a lot of harm, and I know it's become quite famous, his 1,000 houses in 100 days, where he demolished 800 houses that were vacant or abandoned. And not only did that impact our affordable housing and our Black and Latina communities, it harmed the environment. And to this day, those communities are riddled with lead dust. And I think this is a very important conversation because I think nationally, all progressives and leftists are beginning to realize that people like Pete Buttigieg, they appear one way, but the data tells a very different story.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, he does admire Barack Obama a lot. There's, mashups of him side by side, videos sounding alike, saying the same thing. So maybe it's the whole, Obama also was very, lead positive when he was in Flint, Michigan. Told people that he probably ate some lead chips, paint chips when he was a kid. So, yeah.
And, he's a part of the elite. I mean, he went to all the right schools and so it's not even as much Democrat, Republican as he's a part of the elite establishment. And I hope that all progressives and leftists, as we've seen the nation and how difficult it is to get representation from people in DC, to start moving locally and pushing locally. Because I think we can agree Black Lives Matter and the advocates for the homeless have made great progress in the last 6 months just by continuing to pressure our local politicians. And so back to Pete and the homeless situation, he was notorious for spending a lot of money on consultants and telling us he had studies happening and committees and then not taking the recommendations. So that's what happened with the homeless. And if you look at when he first opened the winter amnesty 2017 for the winter, there was they counted 30 homeless. Well, we have 125 homeless in the motels that we've put in motels since August, and we have 120 on the wait list. And we've not even touched everybody in this community. So he was very harmful for our most vulnerable. He's gentrified our city, which has skyrocketed our housing market that people can no longer get into. It's a really sad situation.
Anthony Clark, you're not South Bendian or South Bend based, but you were someone who I was tweeting that I wanted to have people on to talk about this, and someone recommended you, and because you had been to, I think you had done some protesting in South Bend, and I realized though that your perspective is really important, just as someone who does organizing, community organizing in not in South Bend, but you're in
Chicago, Illinois.
And so I wanted to get your perspective on this. And also, of course, as someone who ran for Congress, you were a brand new Congress candidate, wanted to talk to you about the challenges in that area, especially when, we need more Anthonys and fewer Petes. So
definitely, again, thank you for having me on. I appreciate everything that you do. Thank you, everyone that's on this. Just to keep it short, I'm from Chicago, born and raised. And I think there was two main components that led me to go to South Bend, Indiana. It was actually for an Our Revolution event that was taking place. And from that, I decided to actually go into the community And, I was with Jordan and other individuals from Black Lives Matter South Bend to just see, just to look at the infrastructure myself, see the community for myself. And, two basic things that I understand about Pete, in my opinion, I statements is one, he is not about change. He is a protector of status quo. He is a representative of status quo. And two, racism is systemic, and systemic racism exists in our transportation systems and in all the systems that exist. So even prior to him becoming the incoming secretary for DOT, I thought it was extremely important to further expose, or do what I can to further expose and educate individuals to the issues that are taking place in South Bend. And because struggle is a universal language, the same issues that exist in South Bend exist in Chicago, exist in other areas, throughout this country. So for me, it was just eye-opening to see the lack of infrastructure investment that existed. It was already discussed. I believe that, like many leaders across this nation, neoliberals, et cetera, that are tied to corporations, he invested in certain areas in the community. You saw gentrification occurring. You mentioned before we got on the 11-year-old black boy that was murdered due to what I believe was called his Smart Street or Smart Street program. Smart Street program, to where they literally removed lights. Had consultants come in because it was about bike lanes. And I can't speak for every city, but where I'm from, when you see bike lanes go up, when you see like Divvy bikes go up and these different for pay bikes and Starbucks, you're gentrifying. You're trying to change that area and change that community and bring in predominantly white individuals, in my estimation. So I just want to end with, when that happened, along with some police issues that took place, Mayor Pete did not show the leadership ability or the ability to communicate to the Black community, to reach out and build bridges and actually work with. He became defensive. He defended his stance, and I believe he further alienated the Black community within South Bend. So if you think about the systemic issues that exist in transportation, knowing that he's going to maintain status quo, knowing he already had an issue with a smaller Black community population in South Bend, how the hell is he going to lead the DOT and address the systemic issues that exist within transportation? Because there's two transportation systems, one that accommodates and listens to white comfort, and others that just essentially looks at urban communities and say, okay, these Black and brown folk are poor. Let's just provide them with the bare minimum to get them to where they need to go.
It's like almost a perfect metaphor, the like yuppification, like bicycles, they're good for the environment. They're so great. And like you're actually like, you killed a Black child in pursuit of that, talk about like greenwashing. I kind of assumed that like you wouldn't bring in someone who had done something which resulted in the death of a Black child just for like optics. Like, which is a sad statement, but I really thought that like that would just be not a good move PR wise. And it's kind of shocking that like, I mean, I had to look so far and hard for that story. Why is that not a national story when you're nominating someone to transportation? And on a similar note, I mean, this is not a fatal, lethal story, but a similarly undercovered story was when Mayor Pete, his campaign announced that it had the support of Black leaders who had signed on to a letter that they just hadn't signed on to. And I mean, those are different things, but there's such an entitlement and there's such a enabling by the media. I mean, it is stunning that those weren't huge stories.
Oh yeah, absolutely, because it just reeks of white supremacy all over, a white privilege. He's able to use himself and think abstractly. I mean, the Douglas plan, where did that come out of? That came out of nowhere, right? And I mean, I remember sitting in a council meeting and folks were talking about the Douglas plan, and a couple of Black folks went up to the podium and they said, here's Mayor Pete. He has this big Douglas plan he wants to reveal and to roll out for Black America. And folks would go up to the podium and talk to our council members and ask, where's our Douglas plan in South Bend, Indiana? Because the things that he is pushing out there as sort of, he is the white savior of the Black nation.
Yeah.
He is not doing in town. And so it becomes very disingenuous. He comes off as not really caring, but he's a politician. We have to remember this, he's a Democrat, he's a politician, he's making calculated decisions all the time. But something I think that hasn't been talked about is he comes off as sort of this moral crusader, but when you don't help out Black families when they are attacked by police, or you keep police chiefs in there that are complicit in the systemic racism in your police department, that actually has an appeal to a very overtly white supremacist population too. So I think personally that he was trying to strike up that balance where he was able to play to a larger, more white, yuppie-ish sort of crowd that is able to see the moral character of who he is, but also appeal to some of those traditional Trump supporters. And he said it out there right away that he wanted to bring in some of those disaffected Trump supporters. Well, how do you do that? You do that off the blood and the backs of Black people.